Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and today we're going to talk about the question of all questions. That is, how much extra fuel should you take as a pilot? Now, before even starting this video, we can already say that if you ask two airline pilots, you're going to get three answers of this one, because obviously not only are there different fuel philosophies out there by the airlines, but personal experience also plays into this. So, let's start with the legal basics. So how much fuel are you legally required to take? And that is actually quite an easy answer. So the legal minimum fuel, while it obviously varies a little bit depending on the certifying authority, so for example the FAA may require slightly different minimums than the EASA, but overall we can break it down into three different parts. So on one hand side you have the final reserve fuel, and for your typical jet airliner that is 30 minutes. So those 30 minutes are always given, and if a pilot expects to land below these 30 minutes, they are required to declare a fuel emergency. Now, those 30 minutes will always be on board, no matter what. Then you have alternate fuel, and that includes the fuel to carry out a missed approach at the minimum at your destination, complete the entire missed approach procedure, and then divert to a suitable alternate airport and land there. And that alternate fuel also always has to be planned. So with this, you have your final reserve, 30 minutes, and then you have the alternate fuel, which is whatever it takes to get you to that alternate. Now, let me show you a quick example of such a flight plan. Over here we have a plan of the LTU flight 300 from Düsseldorf to Corfu on an A330-200. And as we can see down here, we have the final reserve, that's the 30 minutes, and then over here we have the alternate fuel to Athens in today's case, which is 4,203 kilos or 47 minutes. Now, on top of that, you will always have a contingency fuel as well. And that contingency fuel may vary depending on the certifying authority. Some may require 10%, others 5%. Then under certain circumstances, you can even take 3% if you have a fuel en route alternate available. So lots of different options. But basically, these three, final reserve, alternate, and contingency, always conclude the legal minimum that you always have to take. And then based on this, we are going to decide, so how much do we actually want to take extra? And this is dependent on a lot of factors and on the airline's individual fuel philosophies. So let's go ahead and have a look at an example, and we are going to start this by opening up the significant weather chart and quickly discussing those two options. So there may be more than two, but basically two options are the most widespread among airlines, and then there are airlines who have totally different ideas as well. So the first philosophy is the one that focuses on greatest economy while also leaving a high level of safety, and that is regardless of the weather conditions at your destination airport. If the alternate airport has good weather, you don't need to take any extra. So in this case, going back to the flight plan we had earlier on, you would take your planned takeoff fuel, add the taxi fuel, round that up to the next 100 kilos, and that's it. So in case of this particular flight over here, we would say that the required block fuel is 19,100 kilogram, and that is the figure we would tell the handling agent. Now, what's the advantage of this fuel philosophy? It completely disregards the weather at our destination airport, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. And the background here is that in this example, if an airline sees good weather at the alternate and bad weather at the destination, pilots fly to the destination, they see that the weather is bad, and if they determine that they can't land, you just immediately divert to the alternate airport. Now, in this occasion, we have to say that the weather at an airport is very, very rarely below landing minimums, and commercial pilots are trained to land their airliner all the way up to the legal weather boundaries, so maximum crosswind, minimum visibility, and that kind of stuff. So a commercial pilot can be expected to be able to land an airplane as long as it is legal to land the airplane there. Now, in this case, Using your minimum fuel has the advantage that you spare a lot of weight because you don't carry that weight of the additional fuel that you otherwise might have to take, and ultimately this leads to greatest economy while maintaining a good level of safety, since your alternate airport has good weather conditions, therefore you can most definitely land there. So why wouldn't all airlines use this? Well, because there is another factor that goes into this, and that obviously are the passengers, or your cargo, depending on the type of operation you do. But especially the passengers, because they can complain themselves. For the cargo, you're just going to get emails about, hey, where's my goods? But passengers can complain, so let's keep them happy. And this leads directly to the other fuel philosophy, and that is carry sufficient fuel that you are rather sure to land at your destination airport. And this is where pilots really have to start thinking, and where pilots have to start analyzing the weather conditions. And I want to show you this significant weather chart over here so that we can have a look into a couple of examples. Now, let's start with a flight to Munich up here in the north. So we can see that there is an area of weather marked around Munich on the significant weather chart over here. It's rated with occasional cumulonimbus clouds from the bottom of the chart to flight level 350. And if they reach up that high, we can be sure that those are going to be some pretty strong thunderstorms. So we can already tell that we are approaching an airport that is kind of close to where the boundary of that weather system lies, and we can tell that in the north the weather should be significantly better. Now, let's say that we are operating for Lufthansa today, because Lufthansa has a base in Munich and they do a lot of connection flights. Therefore, there is a very high value for the airline to get your passengers to your destination so that they can catch the connecting flight in order to reduce all the costs that would be associated with passenger handling if you can't get them onto their connecting flights. Therefore, it may make commercial sense to take some extra fuel here to ensure that you can, for example, wait until a thunderstorm has passed by until you can land at your destination. But now that we know what the general weather in the area looks like, let's go ahead and have a look into the particulars for that airport. So down here in the Weather and NOTAMs tab from the SimBrief, you can look up the weather for an exact airport. And we can see that over here we've got our weather for Munich. So at the moment and in the past, we can see we've had ceiling and visibility okay, clear skies basically. Now, KVOC means that you have no clouds or no significant clouds that could impact your flight. At an altitude below usually 5,000 feet, visibility of 10 kilometers or more. So we can say we have very good weather conditions in Munich at the moment. But if we look at the terminal area forecast, we can see that in the evening, we are going to get some thunderstorms. So we have a probability of 30% for temporary thunderstorm and rain with strong gusts from the west from today 2100 to today midnight UTC. So if we are arriving within this time, which is also the time depicted on the significant weather chart, look at that one down here, valid from 1800 UTC, then we can say for sure that if we arrive within that time, we may encounter some thunderstorms. Now, this particular TUF over here tells us that there is a probability of 30% for temporary thunderstorms within that time. Now, an airline may make up a philosophy like if you see prop 30 tempo, then the actual chance of encountering it is low enough that you don't need to take any extra fuel for that, or that you don't even need to consider that. Other airlines may think different, so depending on the philosophy of the airline, you are now going to decide, okay, so I have this much fuel on board and this probability of encountering that weather. Do I want to take more, or am I happy with that? Now, in case of a line like this in a TAF, I would usually decide to take maybe some 15 or 20 minutes on top. The reason is that we already saw the significant weather chart that we have only occasional cumulonimbus clouds, so occasional thunderstorms, and down here we can see the same thing. So it's a probability of 30% to encounter temporary thunderstorms. Now, thunderstorm cells usually don't last that long. You will be able to see them approach on the weather radar long before you actually get to your destination. Then you will be able to monitor them on the weather radar, and usually they're moving through quite quickly. Basically 15 minutes is a good time to assume over there. So 15 minutes for something like Prop 30 tempo usually works very, very well. Now, remembering that significant weather chart, we said that the weather in the north is generally better. So let's just have a look at a possible alternate airport that we may find somewhere in the north. So for Munich, thinking back to that possible Lufthansa operations, if we take Frankfurt as our alternate airport, we can see down here that Frankfurt, has a couple of thunderstorms during the afternoon, but during the evening time that we were looking at, we can see that the weather is becoming basically very, very good weather. Just some showers of rain over here, and then later on becoming a little bit cloudy, but those thunderstorms will have moved through already, so we don't really need to be worried about that weather anymore. With Frankfurt as our alternate for Munich, we could go there with like 15, 20 minutes extra, something like that. Basically enough to wait out one thunderstorm and then be able to land there. Now, let's have a look at a different example. And looking at our significant weather chart, we have just said that if we can see a widespread weather system, such as the one over here over southern Germany, the Alps and the Balkans, then we have a good idea of some regional weather. However, that is not always the case. Let's go south a little bit and say that we're flying down here to Abuja. Now, Abuja is located somewhere around here, and we are going to have a look at that right now. So let's go ahead and find our weather once again, and this time we're going to Delta November Alpha Alpha. And you guys know already that if I'm going southbound, that usually means the weather goes southbound as well. And indeed, that's exactly what we've got over here. So if we look at the metas, we can see thunderstorms, 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 thunderstorm rain. And going down here into the general forecast, we can see that we've got thunderstorms forecast all throughout the day and temporarily even thunderstorm rain. And only then in the evening it's becoming no significant weather. So if we arrive over here in Abuja somewhere within that time, that means the weather is going to be bad. Absolutely no doubt about that. And chances are, if they forecast thunderstorms or thunderstorm rain without a probability of 30 or 40%, and not always even with a tempo like the one up here telling us generally within this forecast period we have thunderstorms, that is a very good indicator that the weather is not going to be all that good. So let's go ahead and have a look into what our options may be. So if we look into the general Navigraph en route chart, we can see Delta November Alpha Alpha is located just over here, and one good alternate may be down here in Lagos, Delta November Mike Mike. So let's have a look into Delta November Mike Mike to see what kind of weather we are going to find over there. And we can see over here, we actually have good weather conditions. So now we got to ask ourselves, what do we want to do? We could take extra fuel for the sake of getting our passengers to our destination in Delta November Alpha Alpha, the one that we just had open, Abuja. And in that case, with those widespread thunderstorms we have over here, I would probably be taking quite a bit of extra, at least like half an hour or so. But then again, with a very good alternate weather, such as the one over here in Lagos, we could decide not to take any extra at all, and therefore save our airline the cost of carrying that extra fuel. However, at the additional risk that we might be diverting to our alternate airport, which then of course is going to create a lot of cost as well. To give you guys a general idea, a ton of fuel basically costs like $2,000 at the moment, and diverting to an alternate airport easily costs you $100,000. So on an A330 that is. So you can see the relation of cost over there and how often you would divert versus how often you would pay for extra fuel if you want to get your passengers to the destination. And basically most airlines will come to the conclusion that, yeah, it kind of is more economical just to divert at times. But that is where pilot experience also comes into view. And in my experience flying into this region of the world here, we are very close to the equator down here. Chances are, if the weather forecast is bad, the weather is indeed going to be bad. Therefore, I will absolutely decide on taking that extra half an hour for these kind of conditions, probably a good value. But if we also had, let's say, mediocre weather at our alternate, at that point I'd already load up at least an hour of extra fuel. Now, let's talk a little bit about general pilot experience and about the general idea of areas where you may need a lot of extra fuel. So we need to make a difference here between summer and winter time. In winter, basically all weather is weaker than it is in summer, because in summer there is a lot more energy in the atmosphere due to the higher temperatures. The higher temperature means that the air can take on more moisture, and moisture generally converts into bad weather. So if we have, let's say, winter conditions on the northern hemisphere, and under those conditions we are now flying across the Atlantic to Florida, then there is basically no reason to take much extra with it. If we have a look at the significant weather chart over here for North America, then we can say that it's April right now, mid-April, and there's basically not much over here. And that's pretty much what I would say from a pilot's point of view there. In winter, in spring it slowly starts to become more, but in winter, North America, Europe, generally weather systems are rather small, rather weak compared to summertime. However, if we're flying to Florida in summertime, you would absolutely be guaranteed to encounter thunderstorms if you arrive in the afternoon or in the early evening. And if you don't have them at your destination airport, you are going to have them en route, so you will have to avoid thunderstorms anyway. And for that reason, there are lots and lots of pilots who say, if I fly to Florida in summer, at least half an hour, more like 1 hour of extra fuel on top of the minimum. And this really pays off. I can tell you from personal experience, flying into Florida in summertime, you may end up doing like 200 or 300 nautical miles of extra routing just to get around the thunderstorms already when coming inbound. Then you may have something at the airport as well, so you might be holding again as well, and things can stack up quickly over there. The same thing applies when flying to Asia in summertime. Flying to Asia, you're also often going to have bad weather systems. For example, if we look at the significant weather chart over here, we can see that there is an area around Kuala Lumpur down here. So if we were to fly into Kuala Lumpur, Whiskey Mike Kilo Kilo, and have a look into the weather forecast, we can see once again down here we do have temporary in the evening UTC thunderstorms forecast down there, and looking at the meta CBs all the time. So again, the look at the general significant weather chart helps already. Now, looking into the different weather charts that we've just had, you might have seen one particularly large area, and that's usually located somewhere close to the equator, and that is what we call the intertropical convergence zone. And that is an area where significant weather phenomena can appear. Now, in summertime on the northern hemisphere, the intertropical convergence zone is usually located a little bit further north of the equator, while in winter on the northern hemisphere it's usually located south of the equator. But this varies a little bit with the time of the year and with the exact location, so always have a good look at the significant weather chart when you're flying in this area. Now, you can see over here we've got a huge area of CBs, which basically is thousands of miles long, and reaching north to south over here as well. If you plan to fly through this, chances are you will take extra fuel, and probably lots of it. Just recently on my last flight north to south, we went through the intertropical convergence zone in Africa, and while the significant weather chart looked something like it does over here right now, a look at the rain radar revealed that we were facing quite a bit of weather, and ultimately we ended up flying like 200 miles extra just to avoid some thunderstorm systems. So that's absolutely something worth to consider, taking, like 15 to 30 minutes of extra if you are flying through something like this over here, if your route led you through this entirely, then I would probably take like half an hour minimum, irrespective of the actual destination weather, just to get to your destination flying through these weather conditions. So that's absolutely something to consider from a pilot's point of view. So let's summarize this once again. We have two different fuel philosophies. One of them focuses on a little bit greater economy, while of course all of them maintain safety at an acceptable standard at all times. And that first philosophy, focusing on a little bit higher economy, focuses on the fact that most of the time you will be able to land at your destination even if the weather is not good. Therefore, if the weather at your alternate airport is good, irrespective of your destination weather, you are not going to take extra fuel, so that you rather consider an early diversion to your alternate airport than flying on to your destination and forcing a landing over there. Now, the great benefit of this is to save money, because you carry less weight in your aircraft and therefore you don't burn any extra fuel to carry the extra fuel. This is a strategy that you will often see used across point-to-point airlines. Think, for example, low-cost airlines that don't offer any connecting services, while airlines that do offer connecting services, so where it is expensive not to get your passengers to your destination, because you may have to pay for hotels, you may have to pay for getting your passengers onto additional flights, probably even with other carriers if you don't serve a destination many times a day, then it may make more sense to take some additional fuel in order to be able to wait maybe for half an hour or something for bad weather to pass and then land at your original destination, thereby reducing the overall cost for the airline by reducing the cost it takes to accommodate passengers or cargo to get them to their final destination. So, that was a lot of theory. I do hope you guys found this one interesting. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. As mentioned earlier, a lot of things come together into these decisions. Pilots' experience with certain airports or areas. Then you may have different airlines bringing different philosophies. And if you talk to two pilots, you're going to get 3 answers anyway. So this is my take on it. Let me know yours in the comments underneath the video. As always, I do hope you found this one interesting. Be sure to like, comment and subscribe. And if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.